What's going on? Brian Tong here with one of the most exciting Apple products of the year, the MacBook Pro 13-inch with the all-new M1 chip inside. And you know, it looks exactly the same on the outside, the physical design. Everything you see looks the same. And a lot of you made sure to let me know that you were not impressed, but it didn't bother me at all because this is still a great looking piece of hardware. But this is anything but the same with the new M1 processor. And first of all, before we get into this, full transparency, Apple provided me with this MacBook Pro for an early review, so it's gonna be going back to them, and I own a fully loaded MacBook Pro 16-inch from late 2019. This is my workhorse, and I do everything on it. So when early benchmarks leaked out that the new M1 MacBook Air had a higher single core score than my 16-inch, you know that got my attention because, look, I have a personal interest here because I want the machine that gives me the best performance and power, but even if that's not you, there's still gonna be a lot here. Apple told us every Mac with an M1 would be transformed into a completely different class of product. And look, people didn't believe it. Like, people still don't believe it. But after using this MacBook Pro for the past week, this is something special. So I say let's dig into some of the benchmarks. We'll do some practical tests and then also go over the new features and then just really cover all the stuff that matters here. Now, the Geekbench 5 benchmarks, they don't mean everything, but they are significant and they give us a great starting point for comparison. So voila! I have three machines here. This is my MacBook Pro 16-inch, and this is my workhorse. Again, the screen is damaged, so I'm not gonna be, hiding anything, but you don't wanna see that mess. It's also a 2.4 gigahertz, 8-core Intel i9 processor. It's got 64 gigs of RAM, and the AMD Radeon Pro 5600M graphics card. Now, we also have here on this side, the most recent 13-inch MacBook Pro that is still available with a 2 gigahertz quad-core Intel Core i5, 16 gigs of RAM, and an Intel Iris graphics. And then we have the new kid on the block, the new 13-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 processor, 8 gigs of unified memory, and Apple's integrated graphics. Now, I ran the Geekbench benchmark test 10 times on each of these machines while running no other apps, and then I averaged out the score. Each machine is running macOS Big Sur 11.0.1. And then I didn't screen capture this while I was running the test. I just am showing you this shot in the video in case you were wondering. So I know one of you is already like click-clacking away on the keyboard in the comments to say something about that. Well, you can stop now. Now, I already told you that the new M1 MacBook Air outperformed my 16-inch in early benchmarks, and I was already wowed by that, so there's kind of no surprise here. The new M1 chip for the 13-inch MacBook Pro had the best single-core score performance of this group with a 1721, and then the best multi-core score performance at 7570. My fully loaded MacBook Pro 16-inch, and I repeat, this thing is fully freaking loaded. It had a single-core score of 1275 and a multi-core score of 7204. Now, the fan on my 16-inch turned on every time during each test, whereas this MacBook 13, it only turned on once. So yeah, go figure, right? This guy is quiet. Now, the Intel-based 13-inch MacBook Pro had a single-core score of 1228 and a multi-core score of 4444. So let's just take the Intel 13-inch out of this conversation now. Probably a good idea. So just to put this into perspective, if you were going to buy a MacBook Pro 16-inch fully loaded today with its lowest storage configuration at 1 terabyte, it would cost you $4,499 before tax. Well, the new M1 13-inch MacBook Pro with 8 gigs of unified memory and a base storage of 256 gigs will cost you $1,299 before tax. Now, you can make that $1,699 if you want the storage to be the same between both models at 1 terabyte, but we're talking purely on benchmarks. The new MacBook Pro 13-inch with the M1 outperforms a fully loaded MacBook Pro 16-inch for about a third of the cost. And you can also connect it to the Apple Pro Display XDR just like the 16-inch. That's insane, and that's the M1. The M1 chip is freaking insane. So let's just get to some practical comparisons, and exporting video is another good indicator here. We're running the latest Final Cut Pro on Big Sur, and after a clean restart, I took a 4-minute 4K Apple ProRes file and exported it as a master file to the desktop on both machines 3 times. Now, on the 16-inch MacBook Pro, it took 5 minutes, 51 seconds, 5:52, and 5:55 to export the video clip in Final Cut Pro. On the M1 13-inch, it varied from 5 minutes and 10 seconds to 5:29 to 5:40. And these results, they were at least super consistent on the 16-inch, maybe a little less so on the 13-inch M1, but still slightly faster overall. I mean, the fact that it performs slightly better than my 16-inch is already damn impressive. And another takeaway, the fans would set off every time at their fullest on the 16-inch. Here on the 13-inch, they turned on a couple of exports briefly, and it was faint. Like one time, we never heard it at all. Now, here's another fun thing that I did just to entertain myself. Right now, look, I use Adobe Premiere, and I always have because, that's what I'm most efficient at, especially after I went indie. I just couldn't take a bunch of time to really master Final Cut. I know how to use it, but not super efficient because, look, if I'm gonna do that, it's gonna slow down my output right out of the gates. I'm not gonna do that. So I know its advantages, but I'm a Premiere guy still, at least for now. So what I did is I exported that same 4K ProRes file into a 4K H.264 file in Premiere on the 16-inch, and that took 8 minutes and 16 seconds to do both times. Now we know, right, that Adobe Premiere, it's not a universal app and it's not ready for the M1 chip just yet, but it can be translated by Apple's Rosetta 2 as an Intel app that can run on an M1 machine like this until it gets updated. So why not export that same file on the new MacBook Pro 13-inch running Adobe Premiere with Rosetta 2 and just see what happens? And this was just wild. Adobe Premiere running as a non-native app on the M1 MacBook 13 exported that same file with fans running hard into a 4K H.264 file in 5 minutes and 53 seconds, and then the second time, 6 minutes and 6 seconds with my 2 exports. That's over 2 minutes better, significantly outperforming my Intel-based 16-inch MacBook Pro on a machine that the app was written for. Like, I thought that might happen, but maybe I didn't believe it, and I didn't think it would be like such a large gap, and you just don't know until it actually happens, and that was crazy. Like, are you not entertained? Okay, fine, maybe that doesn't turn you on about this, but I reached out to Adobe. They said at least their app Lightroom will be a universal app available next month, and then other apps in the Creative Suite like Photoshop and others are targeting to be ready in early 2021. So those are some benchmarks and export tests that give you an idea of the power here. Again, an app not written for this yet, outperforming the Intel-based 16-inch MacBook Pro fully loaded. Crazy. All right, so now here's another one. We're using Affinity Publisher. Now this is an example of how both of these machines handle a file like this. This is called, the file's called Adventureland, and it was provided by Apple, but what we're gonna do here is just start at 100%, and then what you can do here is zoom into the file. I'm on the 16-inch MacBook Pro right now, and we're gonna find this toy store and just keep zooming into it. Eventually we're gonna get to this sticker on this suitcase, and you can see how the zoom in, it gets pixelated every time you move around. It can be choppy at times on my 16-inch, and we're gonna keep zooming and find the robot. Once we get there, we're gonna make sure we are zoomed in at 100 million %. Now, we're gonna take that same file and we're gonna look at zooming in on this 13-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 like we did on the 16-inch, but you can see overall just how much smoother this moves as we keep zooming in and we keep zooming in, and eventually we're gonna get again to that sticker on the suitcase. We're gonna keep on going to the robot again, and we're gonna finally get to 100 million % zoomed in. Now there's no doubt that this M1 has legit power and it was smoother. You could just, I could easily tell, I hope you could tell as well. But this is just the start for Apple's new platform, and it's only gonna get better, which is crazy. All right, now let's talk about some of its other features. The big one for me and the biggest game changer that is gonna affect everyone that uses this machine, power user or not, it's freaking 20-hour battery life. It's amazing. Now, I know we all work differently, but during the course of the past week, I've been able to get through this about a day and a half of work on this machine easily before having to charge it. And there's some people who will still complain that it looks exactly the same as last year's model or the past few years. But do you really care when we're talking about 20 hours of battery life? That's about 50% of an increase from the last model. And not only is the M1 performance really special, but because it requires less power for that performance, its battery life is just as special too. And I think this feels like Apple just gave us an all new battery with all new tech, but they didn't. That's the M1, and this is just such a huge improvement. Anyone who uses this machine is gonna instantly love it. There's something liberating about not charging your laptop at all in a day. doing everything you want to do. Now, this is also Apple's new premium processor. We know that, but I would have liked to see more than 2 Thunderbolt 3 USB 4 ports on here. Right now, you can only get 4 ports if you purchase the 13-inch MacBook Pro with the Intel processor right now. And unless you're using specific apps that are key for you and Intel only, you probably won't be buying that model. So I know a lot of you are saying you want more ports and you want more flexibility. And trust me, I do too. And I was just kind of giving the little nudge, nudge from our fruit friends that we'll obviously see that in the future. And really, this is just the start for the M1. And I don't know if there are any actual limitations using the M1 or if it was a decision with costs, but it's clear an M1 MacBook Pro or laptop of some sort with 4 ports will be coming in the future. We just don't know when. Now, there's one more thing. No, there's one thing about this MacBook Pro that still haunts me to this day. You know what it is, Apple's 720p FaceTime camera. Now, it won't stop me from buying one. It's not a deal breaker. It isn't, but I would hope that they would have a 1080p camera by now. This isn't happening, but instead with the M1, Apple says that their latest image signal processor is bringing better noise reduction, greater dynamic range, and improved white balance, and then just better face detection. So look, I wanted to see for myself what we got. Now, check this out. On the left is the previous generation 13-inch MacBook Pro, and then on the right, this is the new M1 13-inch with the new image signal processor. This first example is in a combination lighting in kind of like a living room home where it's brighter in the front, but maybe darker in the back. And you can see the M1 boosts the brightness and shadows up significantly here. There's no smudge on my camera in case you were wondering because it kind of looks that way, but there's definitely less noise on the M1, but I personally like the color balance with those kind of deep blacks on the earlier MacBook Pro. Okay, let's go to a fully lit area here in my studio, and again, you see the similar treatment, brighter overall, less shadows, less noise, but you don't get that true black, and it does have a little semi-washed out look again. If we now take this to the night and a darker lit area over in a backyard, which happens on FaceTime calls a lot as well, right? When you're not in the most perfectly lit place. This is where I really preferred the look of the new M1 cameras versus the previous generation. So we can tell, or you can tell, like the new camera's different, and in lower light situations, it performs better. But even with that, there's a big difference from 720p to a 1080p camera, and the MacBook Pro still doesn't have it. Like, I want a better quality camera instead of using my phone that, like, I'll prop it up and lean it against my laptop screen whenever I get a FaceTime call instead. And I know some of you don't care, but I care about this. It's not a deal breaker, but it's still a letdown for me. Now, Apple also touted its new instant wake feature, and it does wake up instantly, like it should, because it's basically using an iPhone processor, but it doesn't make a meaningful difference to me because, look, by the time you open up your laptop wide enough to use it, right, that screen is at that angle where you can start working with it, the screen is already going to be on. So for example, on the previous gen MacBook Pro, I open it up, 1, 2, and the screen is on. On the new M1, I'll open it and it's on, but I get to the screen where it's usable at that point by that same count, 1, 2. So it's instant, it absolutely is, but it didn't really make a difference or save me time where I felt like I gained precious work time. I just think it's a nice to have, I guess, but it's just not really a game changer. But it is a feature that, how they tout it, it's true. Now, the microphones have also been improved to give you the ability to record studio quality sound directly from the MacBook Pro. And it definitely sounds great, and really just more than passable if you want to record something like a podcast, and even I've done it myself. And this just makes this machine an even more impressive content creation tool all in a 13-inch package. Now, this new 13-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 chip inside, it'll start at $1299 for the entry-level model. There's not too much bad to say about this machine. I guess the biggest thing you might critique is the fact that, hey, a whole new generation of processor does deserve a whole new design, and I do agree. Like, who wouldn't want smaller bezels finally? And I am there with you. It's about time. But the power, performance, and battery life here, this is groundbreaking stuff, and that counts for more than something to me. Look, we also know a new design is coming within the next 2 years, and more likely, really within a year for the next crop of laptops that are geared to really more of a power user, which is me. I can be patient. And as for the RAM, I think it is crazy to say that with 8 gigs of RAM on a modern computer, I didn't feel like I was held back. When I buy a computer as a creator, I'm always gonna max out the RAM, but the fact that this machine only has 8 gigs of unified memory just speaks to how differently Apple's system manages it directly. It's all about anecdotal evidence how it feels. Like if you handed this machine to me without telling me the specs and just let me use it, I honestly don't think that I would say, oh, I really wish it had more RAM in it. I was using multiple apps, some universal, others not. Photoshop and Premiere open at the same time. Working with them, I didn't feel held back in any noticeable way. So just really seeing the output from the M1, I might think that it had at least 32 gigs. I thought it was really impressive, and I wasn't gonna, I think with this machine, I wasn't gonna obsess about what we typically know about specs from a processor because, the game has changed. And no, I didn't try to open up as many Chrome tabs as possible. Some of you like to do that. But let's just say you use word processing and surf the web and email. You might not feel much of a difference, but you're still gonna benefit from all the new power. But then also the 20-hour battery life alone, this is huge. Like I repeat, don't forget this, 20-hour battery life. In some cases, some of you are gonna get more than that. So just make sure the apps you use are compatible. If they're Apple ones, you're gonna be fine. If they're crucial third-party ones, make sure before you jump over this machine, that's gonna be important. But this is just the beginning, and it's clear that this launch is really targeting general consumers, but with all the power to start, like a lot of professional users can't believe the performance that we're seeing on an entry-level hardware machine, and we're drooling too. So if you're in the market for a new machine at this price and with this power, even without a new design, this machine is an absolute beast. Apple, they just changed the game. And I know it sounds so cliche even to say it out loud, but they have an absolute game changer with the M1. And the future of the Mac has just never looked brighter. I'm so excited for it being like more of a power user. And the 13-inch MacBook Pro has always kind of been that sweet spot for Apple users in the ecosystem. It starts at the same $1299 price point, and they just made it a whole lot sweeter because this has always been the Mac to get for most people, for the widest audience of users. And look, they just infused this thing with a super soldier serum. And if it sounds like, Brian, you are drinking the Kool-Aid right now and you don't believe the hype, even I didn't really believe it until I really spent time with it. Put your hands on one of these things, use it, and I think it'll change your mind. Now the 13-inch MacBook Pro with the new M1 chip, it outperforms a machine that I paid well over $5,000 for. If this is the computer for you that you're looking at, this is a damn good Apple.